I think the third and final ingredient in a great discussion is great discussions are encouraged by questions that are open-ended. Now, you've got a good question and you've got bad questions. And so I kind of want to spend the rest of our time together talking about what those look like. And there are some really bad discussion questions. And let me share with you some things about bad discussion questions. Those are questions that maybe discourage participation. So anytime you ask a question that discourages participation and is just a simple, cut and dry, one answer question, it's not forcing them to participate in the discussion. Also, bad discussion questions can be questions that can be answered with yes, no, or maybe even a Sunday school answer. You know what kind of questions those are, because if you have students of your own and they came home and you would ask them, how was your day? And that gives them the opportunity to quickly say, fine, it was okay. We want to ask questions that evoke responses, not yes, no, or a Jesus Sunday school type answer. So the better question to ask a student when they get home would be not, how was your day, but tell me about your day. Tell me the best part of your day. Tell me the worst part of your day. So you're evoking response. And so you want to make sure that you're not asking the kind of questions that just simply respond with yes or no. And also you want to make sure that you're not asking questions that suggest that only your opinion is the right one. And so make sure that the questions that you ask are not leading a student to say, hey, only the leader's opinion is what matters. So you want to make sure that you avoid those kind of questions. Let me give you some examples of bad questions. The first one would be like the fill in the blank question. Jesus turned the water into what? You're asking them to answer with a one-answered response that only one person really in the group can answer. You want to avoid loaded questions. Questions that are going to evoke some sort of response, emotional response, like who doesn't like our president and stuff like that. You want to avoid those kind of questions. You also want to avoid rhetorical questions like, well, what would Jesus do? And you want to avoid closed or right answer questions. Questions like, well, how many commandments are there? So avoid those kind of questions. And I think another one that you want to avoid are intimidating questions, or questions that kind of where you have to read the leader's mind. And again, you're looking at your opinion, and your opinion, you're kind of forcing that upon them, and your opinion is the only one that matters. So you want to stay away from those and avoid those. I think that there are some good discussion questions that we can ask. And I think that the key to any good discussion question is one that invites participation from the entire group. So any question that is going to invite participation and engage the entire group, that's a good question. It's questions that also, another one is one that stimulates new questions. So if you can ask the kind of questions that are going to raise other questions in the group, awesome. And I think that's a great thing. And I think also you need to ask questions that are going to affirm each person's opinion. And so ask good questions that can include everyone's opinion. At least give them the opportunity to voice their opinion. Doesn't mean you necessarily agree with their opinion, but you're giving them the opportunity to voice it. Good discussion question examples would be something like feeling questions. These are my favorite ones. You're asking them, so how does what Jesus said make you feel? Or you can ask them, how do you think Daniel felt when King Nebuchadnezzar led him into the lion's den? How do you think that made Daniel feel? So asking those kinds of questions are always awesome questions. How do you think Peter felt in the moment that he realized that he betrayed Jesus? Asking that evokes a response. And so feeling questions are always good. Another one are opinion questions. Ask them, simply come out and say, why do you think Jesus said that? Or why do you think Jesus did that? These are always good questions to ask. Another one is clarifying question. Sometimes students are going to come up with an answer that you're really not sure what they're talking about. So don't be afraid to say, hey, can you give me an example of what you mean? And here's the secret to that. Chances are is if you don't understand the student's response, 9 out of 10 people in that group don't understand the student's response. So don't be afraid to say, hey, can you give me an example of what you mean? A brainstorming question is another great one to involve the entire group. And you can ask a question like this. what are all the possible lessons that you think Jesus is trying to teach in this parable? That is a great way to get everyone involved, because and again, you're also allowing students to voice their opinion. And you might be surprised and might learn something as students come up and share what are some possible lessons from the story. So don't be afraid to ask brainstorming questions. Another question would be a probing question. And an example of this might be, who do you relate to in the story most and why? So let's say that we just talked about the story in the Bible where the friends dropped their friend, they dug a hole in the roof and dropped their friend in front of Jesus to be healed. And you can ask the question, in that story, who do you relate to the most and why? Who do you relate to the cripple that was lowered in to meet Jesus? Do you relate to his friends? Do you relate to the people in the crowd? Who would you relate to the most in that story and why? So those are great probing questions. Another one would be a learning or application question. Simply ask the question, hey, we just read this passage. What did you learn from it? What did you learn? What did you not understand from it? And talk about those things, because now you're leading into other questions. Well, I didn't understand this. Well, let's talk about that. And you can move on to more questions. So don't be afraid to ask learning or application questions. Another example would be a personal experience question. If we think about how King Nebuchadnezzar betrayed Daniel and kind of led him into the lion's den, you can ask, when was the last time that you felt betrayed? When was the last time that someone betrayed you? And so go ahead and ask personal experience questions. You can use this with almost any passage that we talk about in the Bible. Another and final question is maybe a self-examining question. If the Christian life, an example of this would be, if the Christian life was like a football game, where would you be? And so you can ask them, would you be one of the guys on the field? Are you in the game? Maybe you're one of the fans in the stands. You're just checking it out from a distance. Or maybe you're a cheerleader. Who would you be and why? And so don't be afraid to ask self-examining questions. I think all of these are great questions. And I think the key to us to asking good questions is making sure that we're asking questions that give students the opportunity to answer and to voice their opinions and to ask more questions. And so make sure that that's what you're doing in your small groups. We're asking good, thought-provoking, solid, good discussion-leading questions. And make sure that we're staying away from questions that are just shut people down. Well, that's all we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about some more about small groups, and the next time we get together when we talk about 5 mistakes of a small group leader. I think these will be good for us because I think that all of us, including myself, find ourselves in one of these different ways that are kind of dangers or pitfalls to being a small group leader. So I hope that next week you'll join me again. In a couple weeks, I'll email you with another video that you can watch and we can talk about these things. I want to encourage you, if you have questions, if you feel like maybe there's something that you need to talk to me about when we're talking about this issue, feel free to email me, text me, Facebook me, get in touch with me so that we can continue the conversation, because that's what we want to do. So I hope that you have a great week. I thank you again for all of your service, and we'll talk to you soon.